right. Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe good evening, wherever you are. And we are back with our final session of the second day of the Blockchain Community Day conference. And we are going to talk about the indisputable elections topic. And we are happy to see our friend Eugene Morozov, who is a CEO and founder of Everscale Academy and DeVote. And we already had some touches on this topic before. And last year we've been we had a look on some use cases provided by our colleague Joan Hugo, and after that, Eugene already had some overview about indisputable elections. And last year, we were happy to listen to Eugene's and Mitya's talk about GOSH. And today we are going to continue, and I hope that will be a good input about the topic of elections overall. And hi, Eugene, could you please, maybe
Yes,
say a
hello.
couple of
Hello.
welcoming words and about yourself? And after that, we are good to go with your presentation.
Thank you very much. How's the sound? Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
excellent. Well, first of all, Alec, allow me to say a word of thanks to EPAM, Sasha Pitkevich, and yourself, Alec, for hosting me here several times, but also for being relentless in educating the world with the latest advances in technology and knowledge. I think we owe you a word of thanks for helping people understand the art of the possible and what is being offered today. So thank you very much for that. I also wanted to very briefly introduce myself. My name is Aristotle, and I come to you with the subject of governance from the year of 350 before Christ. Before we talk about finance, before we talk about many other potential use cases for blockchain, we probably should look at some fundamentals. And the fundamentals were well researched and studied by many ancient thinkers, like myself, Aristotle, where in my work, Politics, published on papyrus in Athens in 350 BC, I wrote, none of the principles on which men claim to rule and hold other men in subjection to them are strictly right. Now, let's think about that for a moment. Who are those words coming from, right? Who was I 2,000 years ago? Now, there are documentary evidence that Aristotle was revered among both medieval Muslim scholars, which called him as the first teacher. Same among medieval Christians, like Thomas Aquinas, who called Aristotle the philosopher. And an Italian poet, Dante Alighieri, called me the master of those who know. Allow me to quote some Dante. And remember, this is about 500 years old at the moment. I saw the master there of those who know, amid the philosophic family, by all admired and by all reverenced. There Plato, too, I saw, and Socrates, who stood beside him closer than the rest. Now, what did Aristotle contribute to the science in the world? He is widely known to have worked on a variety of subjects, scientific subjects, starting with syllogisms, such as all men are mortal, all Greeks are men, all Greeks therefore are mortal. This is from 2,000 years ago. He looked at the growth laws, for example, and defined the scientific style of presentation of knowledge. He looked at physics very closely. Laws of motion, in particular, heavier, lighter objects. He looked at elements, None of those work have been contradicted by any modern science. 2,000 years ago, mind you. Aristotle looked at soul and memory and dreams and a variety of other subjects which are part of everyday's life, such as, you will enjoy this one, virtues and their accompanying vices. Just take a look at this beautiful compilation of virtues and vices, something probably to have on everyone's desktop. Now, eventually, Aristotle got to study something very, very important as well, and that is how societies govern themselves. Now, the chart on the right you see here essentially comes directly from his works. And if we look at it in a little more detail, then there are really 6 types of governance that Aristotle considered to be practical. The governance by the one, monarchy or tyranny, governance by the few, aristocracy or oligarchy, and then form of government where the many govern. We know one of it today. We call it democracy. But Aristotle considered a much more advanced one called policy, polity. Um, Now, to remind you what I started with, none of the systems are perfect. And I think people who are trying to design and create the perfect system, they're going to face some challenges on the way there. And what you need to keep in mind is how can you improve what you have today? Now, let's go back in history. And at the time of Aristotle in Greece's Macedonia province, all these cities and towns were very small. And people could exercise what we call today direct democracy. They would assemble at town square, they would debate, they would raise their hands or exercise their right to vote in some other form, but they were all there. Now, with the time, population grew, it became impossible, and eventually Romans introduced what's called today in the US an electoral college, which essentially is people first elect their representatives, and then those representatives go and elect the actual government. Now, that system, well, worked for a while. Of course, as we see today, contains a lot of issues, and there are problems with it. Corruption, private interests, um, unfair marketing practices, deception, fake news. The list goes on forever. So until now, there was no clearer path or way to improve the situation. Now, what changed? Technology, of course. And what we are discussing today is the possibility and some promises made by different market participants in this area to make polity as a governance concept a reality through a combination of technologies. First of all, of course, your mobile devices or wearables that allow you to stay in touch, to communicate, right? You need very high speed and scalability of your communications network. If you have a society with 100 million people or 1 billion people, you just cannot avoid that, right? You need the most advanced cryptography combined with like really truly scalable on demand blockchain, very high throughput with sub-second finality and SAPs of at least million TPS. So those are very demanding and very challenging technical requirements. But, and also we're talking about a multi-chain solution for, I think, obvious reasons, right? Not to favor any one particular blockchain, but make it possible to run the platform of the solution on multiple blockchains. Now, and also you have to allow for polity to work, really, you have to allow for true anonymity and decentralization. Now, we are used now to saying sufficiently decentralized, and I think that's a acceptable terminology for many people to use. So if you have a sufficiently decentralized network, it might work. Now, in some cases, a customer, the use case will demand permission, right? Let's say if it's a national elections issue, right, and the country wants to control its own nodes, control all the data, so it's hard to say no. So there may be cases for permission, but the overwhelming majority, of course, should run on permissionless public blockchains, and it's that they are sufficiently decentralized, and as I said, allow for true anonymity. What's true anonymity? Well, today there are several highly advanced technical mathematical solutions. One of them is zero knowledge proofs, which we happen to use, and we have our own engine at DeVote. But again, there are many other highly skilled cryptographic teams in the world that are working in this direction at the moment. So there will be more solutions eventually coming. Now, also to allow for quality, you need obviously airtight security, right? And all of the attack vectors must be addressed, and proper defenses must be designed. Also, the only chance of any solution to be widely spread and widely adopted is, of course, auditability. We think it's all must be open source, and that's the only way anyone who cares, right, and anyone with adequate technical skills can come and essentially verify. Do you have a Trojan there? I mean, can you trust this code? How, what's the code about? So ability to, for independent people to come at any time before election, after election, and verify both the code and the result if they want is very, very important. And campaign audit is a must. Now, very briefly, here's some fun facts for you. Switching back to finance from that, right? How did our society govern finance as a whole? Well, it's interesting here that from the year of 1450, it was Portugal setting global standards for about 80 years, and Spain, and Netherlands, and France, Britain, and then eventually the United States. And the world continues to change, right? So this illustrates the fact that no single system will survive, right? It will be adapting itself at best to the actual environment. Um, I know that our previous speakers today talked a lot about centralized versus decentralization in finance, and it has its pluses and minuses also, as the just filed lawsuit from the Securities and Exchange Commission shows against Binance. Nothing is clear cut. So the regulator in the U.S. now thinks that the highly regulated and tightly allegedly controlled U.S. part of Binance operations was fully compliant. Well, the regulator disagrees. So this illustrates the complexity of interaction between centralized and therefore under government control, not only election systems, but like financial systems as well. And then decentralized, they have their own pluses and minuses as well. So let us not take them in the absolute and just adapt them to a particular use case we are discussing. And there's always a balance between freedom and governance. And as long as we decide as citizens what is that balance, what is comfortable for us, as long as we do that, I think we can find an appropriate compromise. There are some companies out there, again, going back to one other interesting topic that was brought up earlier today during presentation, and that is UID. Now, this is a very hotly debated topic at the moment. There are countries where there's a single organization issuing all 100 million voter ID cards, and therefore, with very easy access through phone numbers and addresses, whatever else, to the eligible voter list. That's a luxury that very few countries have. At the other end of the spectrum, take, for example, the United States, where all elections are local. Even federal elections are local. They're run by local election officials in 50 states, and each state has their own rule, both in terms of what your ID is, right? Is it DMV issued? Is it Secretary of State issued? Is it like there's a variety of options there. And then again, it's different in, let's say, 50 different jurisdictions. That's a country, very complicated. So an attempt to somehow streamline that and assign a unique identifier to a person is understandable. Blockchain offers an alternative, which we strongly recommend, and that is just remember your 12 keywords. And if you do, then you control your assets, you control your information, and you control your future. You can also have several sets of 12 keywords depending on the situation, right? For example, you can have a public key that's associated with your like social status in a particular jurisdiction. You can have a public key, therefore corresponding private key associated with your financial transactions, let's say on a DEX. And there's a variety of other ways you can use identity confirmed by knowledge, by information. In this case, 12 random words of the English language out of the total of roughly 600,000 words in English. Then once you have your 12 words, you can go much further. You can do digital organizations, you can do business, you can create trade and pledge assets. And of course, then you move on to just about every aspect of life. So if you remember your words, you own your identity, you own your assets, you own everything else you might potentially need. And there's many people in the world that are doing exactly this right now. They're thinking how to connect your wine collection with your crypto holdings, or how to help with your land title registry on blockchain or marriage certificate, or how do you record the oil reserves immutably on blockchain. So there's a variety of applications you can see here. And same relates to relationships between an employee and an employer. It is so easy to process all of the payments associated with employment once you have those two public keys set up, that one of an employer, the other one of an employee. Now, what the guys on the call earlier today unfortunately didn't talk is that with all the transparency in financial flows, which is, yes, important, but almost nobody in the world today offers double entry accounting on blockchain, except one great company, Tapestry, which I'm aware of, my colleagues. And it's critical for any business adoption, right? So like Coinbase, to my knowledge, doesn't offer double entry accounting for transactions for its customers, right? The customer has to reflect that in QuickBooks somehow. So complicated. And there's other issues that also come into play here, but they're all addressable. Eventually, you can process all the transactions ultimately in your store with the use of the keys. And then, of course, all the tax-related payments and profit margins and whatever cost of goods sold can be easily traced and reflected on blockchain as well. And not to make things more complicated than they need to be, but basically this is what we are looking at the moment. This slide is from a presentation Michael Proper and I did at the Government Blockchain Association conference at the end of last month, just to illustrate the complexities of any comparisons between different blockchain solutions as they are relevant to this particular to financial area, but also a lot of relevant like latency and finality and of course transaction cost are relevant to election industry, which is more near and dear to my heart than the race. Well, I would probably say this is by and large my introduction. Um, I'm happy to maybe answer any questions or shed some more light on anything I have said before.
Okay, Eugene, thank you so much for your presentation. I think that was very easy to understand in terms of the content and in terms of the details. I like that approach, and
Thank you.
it's much more distilled than the previous ones. And let me check if we have any questions at this point. So I don't see any questions right now, but yeah, if there will be some, I will address them to you. But I also hear my echo for some reason. I hope it will be fine now. So checking it. So uh, let me keep the discussion going until the questions are coming from our audience. And what do you think are the main bottlenecks of the elections, of adoption of elections based on blockchain?
Yes, thank you for that question, Alec. Elections industry as a whole is a very complicated one. Let us start by looking at what types of customers, what type of users we see, right? Let's start with the one more perhaps near and dear to our heart, and that's a digital type of customer. So DAOs. DAOs probably have the easiest way to adopt um, both blockchain and zero knowledge technology just because they usually have technically very advanced people already. And it's easier for them to understand what's going on. So I think the easiest way for the new ways to govern, including the indisputable zero knowledge based elections, is through DAOs. Now, the second category, which has their own challenges, it's corporations. The easiest use case I can think of is like homeowners association. There are tens of thousands of those, for example, in the US. And these are only golf clubs and condominiums, and there's a million of them. And they vote for something all the time, at least once a month, usually. What color to paint the hallway, who should be the treasurer, how much money to spend on new janitor. There's a million of different things like that, and they're very hotly debated to the situation where like people start fighting. It's very hot area. The color of your hallway. So people really want to have like their voice fairly represented. So that's the second easiest kind of audience that we can probably go after by offering them this new way that they can vote, right, and govern their state of affairs, let's say in their condominium, wherever it happens to be. Now, when we go to a public, political, in other words, that's where it gets really complicated. And the barriers for adoption are numerous. First of all, people hate change. It is much easier to suggest any technological innovations as an adaptation. right? We want to adapt, we want to improve. If you just try saying something in politics, we think this should be done differently, changed, right? You're not going to get much support because of the inherent inertia and just legacy issues. And also, of course, this is about huge budgets, right? Elections is about controlling the budget. So you want to be very careful here. So I see significant barriers. Now, how do you overcome them? Well, it's also very clear. You just introduce this technology where you can. And there are some countries which are at the forefront of the planet in trying and adapting new technologies, like I can name Estonia, I can name Salvador, usually smaller countries which are willing to experiment. And then bigger countries will look at them. And right now we're talking to a country with 100 million voters to see if this technology can be used in the actual elections they have next year. So um, it's coming. It's coming through examples. It's coming through more advanced countries on the political front, and it's coming very naturally in the digital world, where there's obviously need to both be able to vote with the number of tokens you own, right, pro rata, or and sometimes both. You need to vote as an individual, right? So per capita. Both are available today, and I'm hoping that adoption will follow shortly. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Okay, yes, I hope that the other countries will follow the example of Estonia and other good references in implementing blockchain elections. And so I remember you talked about this natural process of adoption, but is there a way to make it to make a big push from the back to make it faster to to force it somehow?
Well, maybe, maybe not. On the political side, there are a number of efforts that are being taken right now by the United Nations, particularly by United Nations Joint Pension Fund, which is through its leadership is very technically advanced, and they introduced. Listen to this. They introduced remote biometric identification for its 90,000 pensioners living in 190 countries that replaced the process of paper verification that they're alive before they receive their pension payment. So something that took like 4 months by mail from some remote country to New York and back now takes a few minutes. An individual simply opens the app on their phone, biometrically identifies, answers some questions, allowing for the soft to identify that they're alive indeed, and they are who they say they are. And then they get their pensions like 2 minutes later, 2 seconds later, maybe on their crypto wallet. Now, if that's done at the level of the United Nations Pension Fund, I would say it can be done at the level of anybody or anywhere. And so on October 8, 12 this year, UN is hosting an Internet Governance Day in Kyoto, Japan. So we're going there to present. We are part of the working group that's preparing for Government Blockchain Association component of that event. We're part of GBA. And so there'll be a push that you're referring to on the political side. That's a good example. United Nations says this is how things can be done. I think there's a lot of comfort in that for individual countries to follow. Now, on the commercial side, well, it's people like EPAM, Alec, right? The more you advise your customer base about the availability of those tools, right, the faster the adoption, right? So if you made an announcement tomorrow, let's say, guys, why don't you all switch to indisputable elections on DeVoteUSA.com, or why don't you all go and use soft cooperative voting consensus mechanism on Gosh? That's adoption. I think it's really people with the reach, like EPAM, like other big system integrators and big IT companies that have a say in that. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, for sure. I absolutely agree with you. And if we are speaking about these small groups of different small groups who are trying to implement blockchain elections, such as communities, such as neighborhoods, or maybe universities, or many other types of panels where the elections are useful. So, does it also require this kind of digital identity kind of things or not? I think you're on mute. Could you please? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. No, they don't have to go through that complexity. The solution we have at the moment allows for, remember, this is B2B, right? So our customer is either a local election official or like a corporate admin who conducts, let's say, proxy vote for a corporation, or it would be like secretary of the board of directors of a condo, like golf club, arranging that. So what they do is they come, they say, hey, we have, let's say, like a trade union with like average, let's say, 10,000 members, right? So they come and say, we have 10,000 people. Here's the list. Here's their phone numbers. Um, and this is the agenda, right? So this is the questions. Here they have to vote for like 2 out of 5. Here they have to select one, and here they can select as many as they want, right? So they bring us the bulletin. We call it metadata. And so we set it up very quickly, exactly to follow what they have. And that's it. So all they need, let me repeat, is a list of individuals with a phone number so we can send a text for 2FA. Right? We want to identify those people to make sure that this phone number indeed is the, with the person that they say they are. And so two-factor authentication is important. We didn't go to full-blown biometric identification like UN pension fund, but it is an option available. Like for larger clients, that's not a problem. But the simple case, you bring us the list of your eligible voters or union members or whatever you call them. You bring us the bulletin itself, right? What are the questions? And then there's a payment associated with, like, we just price it like a dollar vote, very simple, and you pay the price. That's it, and then we
Mhm.
conduct elections for you.
Okay, and speaking about those bulletins, let's imagine, for example, a simple, not a simple, a regular developing country, and let's imagine that they are trying to implement blockchain-based elections on a governmental level for the upcoming, for example, deputies or ministries elections or anything else, and how to be sure that there are no concerns regarding this accessibility of blockchain-based voting systems, particularly for those individuals who are maybe who may not have any access to necessary technology, or maybe even don't have digital literacy, or living somewhere in the countryside. How to get them involved into this technology-based system?
Yes, that's a great question. I have a particular country in mind, but I will not name it. But what I will say is, due to a variety of geopolitical issues, the voter turnout is 18%. So they elected their president a few years ago, like with 18%, 1/8. That's not really representative of the country's population, yet, the president is in power. Um, so the big issue that the country wants to address is, how do you increase the voter turnout? And there's zero incentive and big risks for people to actually go to polling stations. Now, the solution is you should vote from home, from your phone. Now, granted, some areas like in Haiti, for example, 43% of the country is not covered by cell towers. So you just don't have cellular connection in Haiti, like a third of the country, let's say. Yeah, you have to deal with those situations separately. Those are difficult. But what you do is you provide at least as good, but clearly better, right? So those problems of inaccessibility of people in remote areas, They're not really material in most countries. Again, Haiti is an obvious exception. But in most countries, they're covered, like 99% of countries covered by uh, uh, good enough cellular reception. You can certainly do blockchain transactions, you know, on your device, so record whatever you need. And generally, compared to the amount of effort you have to spend to go to an actual polling station, just you pull out up your phone and push some buttons. You don't need to go or drive anywhere. That critically changes participation, critically, to the factor of several times. So yeah, by allowing people to vote, to exercise their voting rights right from the comfort of their couch, pushes adoption significantly, and that's what we're trying to implement right now.
Okay, yeah, I hope that from year by year this will get easier, much easier for people, and I would agree that there are some literacy issues about how to set up a wallet, about cryptocurrency for a regular person in this world, and
Yes.
when do you think this all that social aspects, regulatory aspects, any kind of other aspects will be on the same page, and maybe you have any predictions when we will get this adopted.
Well, as I said, adoption is taking place today, slowly, gradually, but it's unstoppable. I think technology will, like water through rocks, it will make its way. I believe that things like blockchain and zero knowledge are here to stay and only increase their influence on everyday people's lives. Our colleagues talked about finance. I talked about governance, and there's many other aspects where this technology is to stay. I think elections industry is ripe for critical improvement. Going back to Aristotle's concept of polity, again, if we look at it as an improvement of what we have today, I think the adoption is coming very soon, based on pioneering companies and countries and DAOs, groups of people, which are helping show the rest of the planet the art of the possible, we like to call
Okay, so at this point, I would like to conclude that I think we all of us we can't wait to see the times when an average person will think that voting with a mobile phone is much easier than going to the elections point somewhere in the nearest school, hospital, or anywhere else, and to fill up this bulletin and drop that in a box. Hope to see it in the nearest future. And Eugene, thank you so much for coming for the third time, I guess. And we are always happy to see you again and again on our community events and to collaborate on some way or another. So, if there will be any questions in written form, we will address them directly to you and ask to answer in text. And I would like to wish everyone good luck and say thank you for coming.
it. Thank you very
And
much. Thank you,
this
guys.
was the last session for today. And tomorrow we will be back with another check, which will be dedicated to the topic of technology and vendors. Same place, same time. The invitations are in your calendars. So please stay tuned and see you soon. Cheers.